All right, shall we begin? Inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum, Shaykh.
Alaikum assalam, Maulana.
I wanted to first begin by thanking you for joining us, as well as for all of your efforts, all of your hard work.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much. I think the credit goes to you and the community for the invitation. So I'm grateful.
Alhamdulillah. So one of the things that we do is we jump right in and we try to make a dividing line between haqq and batil. So the first question I wanted to begin with, inshallah, is do you prefer coffee or do you prefer tea?
Coming from two countries that are tea drinkers, primarily from Iraq, and my family in Iraq, there is no coffee unless exceptional in Fawata. Otherwise, everybody drinks tea. And then moving to England, England as a tea drinker, I really occasionally saw people drinking coffee, what everybody else for enjoyment, it was tea. So I'm addicted to tea. It was only when I moved to United States that a transition had to take place. Either I have to make my own tea, mix my own tea and do it at home and have a samawar in office and at home, or force myself to go and drink coffee. And the sign of it is this cup that I've been trying to swallow little bit by little bit, sip by sip, but doesn't go.
So we can say ulama Islam, they prefer tea, right? We can even say it's an Islamic option.
I don't think ulama these days are drifting towards drinking coffee. Still, wherever you go, there's the kind of chai is there.
Yes. The second question that I had for you, what is probably your funniest story? I know you probably have many funny stories, but during your time as a scholar, what was perhaps one of the funnier stories that you can tell us about?
To be honest, Maulana, when you send me the script, I looked at it, and probably I spent more time in trying to answer the first question than any other question. Going back to the Hawza, I don't think the Hawza at that time structured that light-hearted things became part of the system. It wasn't available. Everyone that you looked at was stern, serious, and so funny stories that I could probably remember in early part of the Hawza was when few friends would gather together to go to Kufa for swimming. That over there, the bashfulness, we leave it out, reservation is out, and literally we became kids again. And those times, swimming, laughing, joking, wandering around like a proper teenager or an individual. But as soon as we began the journey back to Najaf, it's in past, so we had to leave it behind. Yeah. And even in Qom, I remember when I left Iraq and I went to Qom, those days when Qom, beyond Marhum Shariat Madaris Center, literally it was a desert. And the best time that we had light-hearted was when the group of people that we lived in Madrasa Aghay Maraishi in Khiyaban era. We get together and go out for football, not soccer. I mean soccer, not American football. And over there, everything went. They just left the whole thing behind. We got dirty and then came back. Transition took place. So it is very difficult to pinpoint, but those days have stayed in my mind that how to the system, the Hawza itself was anti-enjoyment. Oh, and I mean it. If somebody laughed, say my school was Ayatollah Marhum Akhund school in Najaf, Suq al-Hawaish, at the end of Suq al-Hawaish, Madrasat al-Akhund al-Kubra. And if we moved Suq al-Hawaish towards Haram, and we on a regular basis saw our professors, teachers, and so on. If two closely aged students would laugh or talk loud and so on. And if any one of them would pass by, they would give you such a stern look that you're out of place. So we constantly be aware that not to do this. So the question is very difficult. If I want to specifically say, yeah, those days with the friends in Kufa wandering around and joking and so on, and some days in Qom that we went outside.
Go into your childhood. Where were you born? How was that like growing up there?
My ancestors moved from Iran to Iraq around, if I remember the date correctly, around 1893. And that was the time of Tahrim Tambaku by Marhum Mirza Shirazi, the great. My paternal side, the ancestors were living in Kazerooni, and it seems that the area was ripe for tobacco growing. And the fatwa affected the growing of tobacco and selling it. So landowners took their revenge against the scholars, the mashayikh. So people packed and left. Some gave up on theological basis.
You have history in your family as they were all scholars.
Yes, from paternal side, as long as I can remember. And that is the reason you have a question as to why I came into it. It wasn't my wish and desire. So paternal side, they were all scholars, so they left. Some gave up on theology and remaining and went into business, stayed in Isfahan and went to the Persian Gulf and Kuwait and other places. Others traveled to Iraq and few traveled to Lebanon.
Yeah.
Our family traveled to Iraq, and this was during the Ottoman period. And they stayed there. Their cultural norm at the time was that the first son of each generation had to become a theologian.
Okay.
For this continuity to exist.
So you would draw the short straw or maybe the long straw. I don't know what the difference.
And you know where I'm leading to. So by the time I reached the age of 8 and 9, I was literally hit like by the news that as of tomorrow, your schools are over, you're going to go to Hawza. And I pleaded. Not only I pleaded, I took my uncle. By that time, my father was killed, and my uncle, I took him to the school. I said, come and speak to the principal. And the principal pleaded that, look, don't take him out. He has a bright future. They wouldn't listen. He has to become a theologian.
Ah.
And they say the rest is history.
And so you grew up in Najaf, the city of Najaf. So your family is there.
And my ancestors, at least 2 or 3 generations, they were born in Najaf and buried in Najaf. And I was born in Najaf, but naturally those days we traveled around to Karbala, Kadmir, Samabra, and so on.
Was Najaf different at that time? Obviously, it was, technology, all of that was non-existent. How different was it if you compare today, the Najaf of today to your childhood?
There is an overlap. And there are differences. Najaf of my old days was similar to, how can I put it, say Harvard, Princeton, or Oxford and Cambridge. They were cities that rested on theological schools. So everywhere you went, theological schools and theologians were the dominant features of the city. The Najaf of today is completely different. The theologians are still around, but major schools that we used to frequent and study and so on are demolished, have been demolished. Madrasa Ayatollah Burjirdi has been demolished. Madrasa Qazwini has been demolished. Madrasa Sayyidina Amara has been demolished. A number of others, because of particularly the late expansion to the mausoleum and the site. Most of these old schools were removed. A few months ago, 4 months ago, when I was there, and I was literally brought tears to my eyes when I looked around. There's no sign of all these schools that, as a child, I used to go to various schools to listen to various professors. So, major shift that has taken place is Kufa. Literally is connected to Najaf. There is during my days was just desert. It was in that desert that I began to learn how to drive. We had a driving instructor. I had an old Mercedes, I think 180, the old 180, like a tank. He would take 3 or 4 mashayikh in this car and would take us to the desert outside Najaf. There is nothing around. Sit behind this steering wheel, go anywhere you want, until you learn how to control the cars.
I would imagine there's nothing to hit.
Nothing.
So it's safe.
Sand, and just wander around. So now, when I first went to visit about 6 or 7 years ago, was struck by how the city has grown. And the same thing goes for Qur.
Yeah.
During my time after that school of Ayatollah Shariat Madari, there was nothing. Now, literally, to close to Isfahan, the whole city has been expanded.
Was the Hawza what you expected it to be? Was it different? How was your initial experiences going into it?
In Najaf?
Yes, in Najaf.
Old or new?
When you were a child.
To be honest, when you grow, Mulana, in what we call theologian families, and you constantly traverse through the city and you see it, you don't expect much. My uncle had a room in Madrasat al-Akhund, and we used to visit over there, so we knew roughly the daily program, how it's structured. There are a number of courses that you have to take by different professors. You have to make sure to select the good ones. And then you went to the school, spend great deal of time researching, and then we had something that I miss, mubahatha, where 2 or 3 or 4 friends would get together and go over the lectures that we have listened to from professors, and literally dissect it through our own research, prepare our critique for tomorrow morning when we go back to the professor and ask these questions. When I was at university here, once I told the professor, he said, it's a wonderful idea, but nobody does it here. So that mubahata helped us. Whenever I go to Qom, there are a number of old students, my colleagues of those days, every time they see me, they say, Shaykh Ibrahim, remember, for example, our discussion about Mohni, or our discussion about Rasail, or our discussion about something. Once you go through the system, you really don't expect it to be different. You're familiar with it. It's a familiar environment. When I went to Qom, yes, it was, the old Qom still was different from that dry, kind of a stern environment that was in Najaf.
Yes.
During our time outside Kufa, the idea that mashayikh, they go for football or soccer, it would have been unacceptable.
Even privately, where no one could see. Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay.
Even privately. If my family, or at least my professors, would come to Kufa one day, I'll give you an example. God bless his soul, Ayatollah Hakim and Ayatollah Khoui. Both of them, Ayatollah Hakim had a house in Kufa that during summer would come and stay there. Ayatollah Khoui, he was a little bit ill, so they would rent a house for him further up the river, close to Qasr al-Malik. And he would come out early in the morning, sits under a date tree, and he was heavy chain smoker, constantly smoke. And his own entourage would sit around him and chat. We kids we prided ourselves in how many times we could swim the river, Euphrates. I remember once, as I was crossing, I realized I'm coming out straight in front of Ayatollah. So I decided not to come out, drift further down, because I knew with these mashayikh and everybody else, average age of 70 and above or 65 and above, they are not going to accept this. Probably they will cut my salary by the beginning of next month. So I decided to drift further down and come out.
It was safer to go downstream than to.
So these kind of things, I began to notice that there was at least some room for enjoyment in Qom, even those days. But in Najaf, no. Even the subjects that you wanted to study had to be strictly controlled. You couldn't go above it. And Marhum Ashhabas Buchani, the student of Marhum Qadi, used to teach Manduma Sabzwari, and the place of teaching was the grave mausoleum for Marhum Sayyid Abdul Hadi Shiraz. As you come out of Baba Tusi, it's still there. You come out immediately to the right, there is like Makbara. And he would go over there and the student go over. For me to travel from Madras al-Akhund to Baba Tusi, which these days it's not a huge distance. Those days we thought it was a long distance. And go in, study and come back, we had to hide Mandumata under our abars in case some of these Asatid would see it and they say, well, you're being paid Sam al-Imam to study philosophy? No way, that's it, out.
So there were subjects definitely that were not studied, they were not encouraged.
No, we're not encouraged at all.
Yeah.
Philosophy was one of them.
I've always been curious, what was the root of the reason? If you go back to the root, where does this come from? Because obviously now things have shifted, at least in Qom, of course, it's shifted. I think to some degree Najaf has also shifted. It's more open. But where is the root of this?
I think it was Maulana false belief that a student at Hawza is supposed to only study fiqh and usul. Nothing more, nothing less. And even Nah, Sarf, Mantak, and so on, that you needed as an introduction or an assistant or something for the course that you want. Even tafsir wasn't there.
Yes.
If anybody wanted to teach tafsir, it wasn't there. Although all of the grand scholars they needed tafsir in their assessment, analogy, etc. But nobody taught tafsir. I only found out tafsir in Qom. Somebody took. Yeah, we had access to a number of books on tafsir, and those days during my day, في ظلال القرآن, Sayyid Qutb, and the Arabic tafsir of Marhum Tabatabai and so on was available. But actually somebody sitting down and teaching tafsir wasn't there. So I think that was the belief that true student of Hawza has to focus only on fiqh and usul. Nothing more, nothing less. Even history nobody taught. Although historically there were a number of attempts to streamline the Hawza and kind of push it towards some newer approach, leaving the old books, old styled. Marhum Sheikh Muhammad Rida Mudaffar tried it. Unfortunately, it didn't succeed. Muntada al-Fiqh, the fiqh school that was structured in a like Kulliyat al-Fiqh and so on, university style. A number of people came out of it. Arham Waili came out of it, Abir Adil Fadli came out of it, Sheikh Asafia came out of it, out of those programs, and a number of others. And Marhum Sayyid al-Hakim supported it, but it didn't catch.
Yeah.
And people still preferred the loose old structures.
You had that, I guess, what they would call institutional inertia. You have this and pulls people in.
And they wouldn't allow. And everybody was afraid that to bring in some kind of new ideas and implement them. In Qom, to a degree, it was better, but a teacher or professor could start a course either in Madrasa Hujjaki or Masjid Azam, or even in Haram or anywhere else. And group of students would congregate and learn and study. Nobody objected to it, so long as what we have as the basic core of the Hawza was studied, and your teachers actually witnessed that you have been attending classes. They cared less about whether you're going to listen to Irfan, Tafsir, Quran, or any other subject.
Eventually, you made your way from Iraq. What made you leave the country of forefathers, your birth, all of this?
It was a political event, that took place in Iraq, and the consequences for me. I think the answer to this is somehow linked to the modern history of Iraq. The British carved the Middle East into small zones and created Iraq after the First World War, during the British Mandate. And they controlled it. They brought one of the sons of Sharif Hussein in Mecca, and they put that person in charge of Syria first, and it was rejected by France. Then they brought that person to Iraq, and he became the first King Faisal after 1920. Ultimately, fast forward, the monarchy came to an end in 1958 when Abdul Karim Qasim, an army officer with a group of officers, toppled the regime and literally massacred the Faisal family. And they took control. Twice there was an attempt on the life of Abdul Karim Qasim by Ba'ath Party. In 1960, they failed, primarily because of the resistance and the push of the Hawza and the ulama and the scholars of Hawza of not to allow them to take control. In 1968, when they came back and succeeded in toppling Abdurrahman Arif, the third president of Iraq, they came with a vengeance. And literally you could divide this into the vengeance against non-religious organizations, which is secular, whether it's military or professors, universities, and so on. But primarily it was against the Hawza and the grand scholars before what they did a few years before. And the policy, the strategy was, after they removed Major Saddam, and the first time it was his uncle, Ahmed Hassan Bakr, after they removed all the military challenges or threats within the army to secure their base, they turned their attention towards the Hawza. And the strategy was to weaken the Hawza. The way they did it, first, they expelled non-Arab students from Najaf and Kalbara everywhere. Iranians, Afghanis, Pakistanis, non-Arabs.
Was this because they had more religious roots? Is that they had moved there for religion?
The numbers, they wanted literally drain the Hawza from scholars. So the first excuse is we don't need non-Arabs, we have Arab students. So they removed them. Huge number of Iranians and others were removed out of Iraq. And then after 1972-73, turned the attention to the Arab students. The way they did it was by creating fear within the Arab community so that people drift out of Hawza themselves. You don't need to do anything about it. Suddenly they appeared on attacking the schools and removing randomly students from various schools and imprisoning them, releasing them, imprisoning them, releasing them, and so on. During that era, I I was taken in. I still remember the day. It was in, I believe, June 1974. Because the weather was hot, the best time for mubahatha and lecture was before the morning prayer. So we would get up very early. We'd go to various schools where our friends were, and we sit for mubahatha. After that, immediately attend the lecture. Then for Salat al-Subh, we go to Haram. And after Salat al-Subh, we went to the madrasa, our own madrasa, dormitory, and stayed there until afternoon when the weather was cold again, relatively, to come out. When we're talking about cold in Najaf, those days
95 degrees or
55 degrees centigrade. I actually remember a frying pan. I put it upside down in front of the sun within Madrasa al-Akhund to prove how hot it was, and cracked an egg in the back. Within a few minutes, it set.
wow.
It was that hot. If your madrasa didn't have Sardab, which was the base underground that you went into there to remain alive from the hot, it was very hard to live. So you had to go to other schools with other friends and go downstairs. And that morning, one of the friends with me was Marhum Sheikh Abbas Guchani's son Muhammad, the youngest son. Sheikh Mahmoud, the oldest son, he's in Tehran now. But the youngest son was the one very close to me. We were very close friends. And we had a lot of shared bahth and school and classes together. We came out of Madrasa al-Burjali. There was, those days, the relationship between the Ba'ath Party and the Soviet Union government was very strong. Most of the Secret Service was trained by the KGB. And even the cars that provided for them, that synonymous for there is a problem, there is a trouble coming in, was a black limousine that these so-called mukhabarat would get into it. Whenever you saw that car driving slowly along the street, if you find the corner and simply dive in to stay away from trouble. And we both came out as we got in front of the street around the Haram from Madrasa al-Burjali. This car was stopping there. Suddenly 6 literally thugs came out, grabbed me by the neck, straight inside, and the car drove off. Straight to Baghdad. So I was taken from prison to prison, and finally, by grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I was released.
Was the arrest targeted or was it random?
No, random.
It was random. They would just drive around and find scholars.
But it is random, but once they identify it. They have agents that now this one or that one. So it random and targeted, both. Random because they wanted to create instability within Hawza, but they select individuals. So it didn't matter whether I was X, Y, or Z, they just came for me. I was released after 4 or 5 months of torture and everything else, and I thought that was the end of it. I went after I remember as soon as I got to Najaf the next day, Shaykh Kazerooni, which was very close associate of Marhum Imam, came to Madrasa al-Akhund, and he said, Sheikh Ibrahim, Haj Agha wants you. And I knew that it's from Marhum Imam. And because Marhum Mustafa was my teacher, so I frequently visited the house of Imam. I went upstairs. There was if you go to the house, the door which opens to the side of the street went upstairs, which they called it Biruni. All the dignitaries, Marhum Imam used to visit them, or they visit him or saw them in that room. Next to it, if this is the room, next to it was another door, which he would reserve it for only individuals that he wanted to speak with privately. So they told me Ajah is inside. I went inside, kissed his hand and sat. And he told me, Shaykh Ibrahim, because he knew me. I had gone to there so many times. Shaykh Ibrahim, tell me the story.
This is Imam Khomeini.
Yes, tell me the story. I tried to avoid it in case I became emotional or something, but he insisted. So I told him exactly what happened. I remember he began crying and weeping. Once I saw him weeping, I decided to stop. And he kept quiet for a while. I kissed his hand, stood up to go back. He said something that when you, in one of your questions that says inspiration, this has been one of the number one. He said, Shaykh Ibrahim, don't worry about it. مشکلات مرد رو میسازه. Calamities in life makes the character. So think about it that way. I thought, well, that's the end of the experience. I can stay in Najaf. But few months later, I was out from Madrasat al-Akhund. Istikhbarat came after me again. I decided this time, if last time it was a fluke that I was released, there is no such chance. So I decided to come out. The challenge was how. I went to Ayatollah. The sons of Marhum Ayatollah Salam bin Hadi Shirazi were very close to my uncles and so on, and I told them about it. First, I went into hiding by going into Sheikh Mahmoud Guchani's house, which was very close to Madrasat al-Akhund, and he communicated with them. They organized it, and they spirited me out of Iraq. And then I went to Iran, stayed for a couple of years, and went back to Syria and Lebanon. It was very difficult to stay in after 1975 Algeria agreement. Istikhbarat and the Secret Service, Iraqis were everywhere, literally. So Marhum Sheikh Nasrullah Al-Khali that built the mausoleum of Sayyida Zainab Salamullah alayha, told me, Sheikh Ibrahim, don't stay here. Go, I'll sort some places out for you. And part of the places that he organized was London. I had a student of mine, Sarwar Sabzawari, that I used to teach him in Najaf, had moved to London and was the imam of a small Pakistani mosque. He's still there. And he called him, arranged him that he would meet me outside the airport, Heathrow Airport. The rest,
as they say, is history. So there was a risk that you could have been kidnapped anywhere.
Killed.
Yeah. And if they took you, then probably that was that.
I had to run away from Iran because of a number of Iraqis that were late at night would be captured by the Secret Service, Iraqi Secret Service, that were wandering around the areas where the Iraqis were living. One person was snatched outside Madrasat al-Marbi in Tehran, where I used to reside. So I said no. I had to move.
So moving into, you make this journey. You're going from Iraq to Iran, and then I believe Syria and Lebanon as well. And eventually you make your way to London. How was it for you? Was it a radical difference? You're now in a non-Muslim country after being in Muslim countries, and from a scholarly family, right? That's very tightly knit structure and sense of religion. Now suddenly you are in a place which is radically different. Was it shocking to you? Was it something normal for you? How was that transition?
Shocking is understated. If you come out of that close environment, even Iran compared to Najaf was more liberal and more relaxed compared to Najaf, but still was a lot in common. And but suddenly coming to London the next day, when it was, I got there late at night, and Maulana Sabzawari was outside to take me to his apartment. Next day, when I decided to go out, I suddenly realized that I have nothing in common with this environment at all. I don't speak the language. I don't know anything about the culture. I need somebody to guide me around. And it was like a blind being led by somebody. And
Probably someone who had just learned to see.
yes,
So,
I was nervous, kept thinking, why Sheikh Nasrullah Khalkhali, Allah yarhamah, why send me to London? But I decided, well, for whatever reason, I really need to do something about myself. I always wanted to study not theology, because theology was, to a degree, as I explained earlier, was a forced kind of line for my future or my life. It wasn't that. I intended to study science, technology, etc., etc. So I said, okay, the first thing is English. And I mastered the language within 1 year. Really worked hard, removed myself from any Iranian and Arab community and stayed in the Pakistani community to be forced to only speak English. And gradually, once I had the proficiency in language, I decided now to start going to university. I applied, but they told me, look, the only qualification you have is from Hawza. Who recognizes Hawza, Qom, Iran? You really need to go and follow these steps in high schools and so on. So I had to go to study during the day, the English, and during the night go to school for academic work. And I was accepted, once I finished, I was accepted at Imperial College. Those days, my undergraduate degree was in mining and petroleum engineering. And very quickly, I didn't know that Imperial College had an agreement with by that time, nobody, even my family, knew where I am. I had left Iraq, left Iran. That was clear. But what happened to me after, I was afraid to tell them in case they find out in Najaf that he's gone and you haven't told us that he has gone. And the reprisal will be against the family. Then the university sent a note to the Iraqi embassy in London that this year we have 2 Iraqi students. So my cover was blown. And this was during the Iraq-Iran war. Within a month, I received a letter from the embassy. First, very diplomatic, very nicely structured. As you know, motherland is going through a difficult circumstance and needs every help that the sons and daughters of this land can provide to support, and you can go back and support, etc., etc. I knew that they want me to go back. So I went and I saw a few friends and talked to them. They said, let's see what we can do. Wait a little bit and see what happens. They sent me, within a month, I didn't respond. Within a month, they sent me another letter, but very stern, that this is the time that you should show your loyalty to the country, etc., etc. So we crafted a letter saying that while I appreciate that the motherland is going through these difficulties, but as you are aware, this is a prestigious university and the course is petroleum engineering, and Iraq is well known for it. Once I graduate, I've become much more useful, hoping that they would step up there. They didn't. Again, about a month or so later, very, very rough letter with a threat that if you don't go back, we will remove all your, you don't no longer exist as an Iraqi. Your jinsiyah, passport, everything else will be negated. That became a blessing in disguise, in a sense that I took a lawyer and we went to the Home Office. There was a well-known Lord Nordus. I don't remember his last name, was Home Secretary at the time. And he had one of this voice, aristocratic voice in British kind of, no, and that kind of shit. we shouldn't allow this to happen. So he wrote on the bottom of the letter that I had petitioned that Home Office should do everything possible to provide me with some kind of at least naturalization so that I can apply for citizenship, which was strange. They wouldn't do that. Alhamdulillah, that went well. It opened the door for me to be able to travel without having to be lumbered with the baggage of Iraq and Iraqi passport. But Iraqi passport was no longer valid anyway, so I had nothing else. And I stayed there for many years, studied. Then I began working in mining around the country. And the mining industry went through a crisis in England, so I decided to go for a master in business administration, hoping that I would move into managerial work. And subhanAllah, the more I tried to move away from theological work, more doors opened to suck me back into it. First thing that came was Sheikh Mohsen Iraqi came to London, and we were close friends from childhood, and neighbors. And he immediately called me and he said, Sheikh Ibrahim, you've been here for a long time. You understand the language, the culture. Can you come and help us? We are trying to establish a center, Islamic Center of England in London was the result of that endeavor. And after that, sorry, it's a long-winded answer. After that, Ayatollah Sistani's office, Ajawad Shahristani and Qom communicated with me that, look, we want to send somebody to go to Montreal, Canada, and check the life of the Shia community over there and provide us with a report to see what we can do. And I went to Montreal for a couple of years. Then went back to London. And Islamic Center received an invitation from the center in Denver that they wanted an imam. And they recommended me to go there. I went a couple of times and they wanted me to stay. So
this was 1980s.
Yeah, late 1980s, 1990s.
1990s.
Yes.
Mm. So fast forward now, you've been a religious scholar, an imam. You've seen probably a large number of communities. You've traveled the world. Moving into our position in the West, we're kind of in a unique time and a unique position. Where would you say we're going? Are we in a good place right now? Are we in a not so good place right now? If we could, for example, rank comprehensively all of the things that the Western Muslim communities are doing, would you give us, for example, from a 1 to 10, what ranking would you end up giving us?
Collectively?
Collectively. Of course, there's going to be stronger, weaker, but in general.
Well, not to be honest, I've traveled all around the United States and abroad. And I've visited other communities around the world and too far east. I wouldn't give more than 4 to 5 maximum to the collective community.
Yeah.
And I would explain why, unfortunately, the malaise of materialism we have literally swallowed it. And as a result, it has affected our moral principle, theological principle, political principle, etc., etc. So the answer to this collectively, I wouldn't give more than 4 or 5. During the period that I was at the Islamic Center in Dearborn, I saw the diversity that exists and how bad the desire for wealth and materialism literally reminded me of what Imam Hussein Salatullah Salam alayhi says, An-nasu abidud dunya. It really has captured the community. It's heartbreaking for somebody to come to your office, Mulana, and say, Mulana, my grandfather was a Lebanese or Syrian or Iraqi. And from my early childhood up to now, I have no notion of what is Islam. Can you work with me and teach me basic Islam? And this is a community that when they came here, was a clear determination that they are going to work hard, establish a center, educate their children, correct materialism, but something within this transition, the spiritual component vanished from the goals and objective.
If you could say, for example, the top 3 issues that we face, what would you say the top 3 issues are, and perhaps even some of the potential solutions?
It's very difficult, Molana, to pinpoint 1 or 2 or 3, but certainly the role of the centers are critical. If we are unable to develop a center that understands the critical need here, understands the objective, and is prepared to come with a strategy. You ask any Islamic center. I asked them myself when I first was asked to join the Islamic Center. I asked them, I just want to know about your mission. Where do you want to be in 4 years, 5 years, and 6 years from now? So immediately I realized that there is no such vision that 4 years from now or 5 years from now, where do we want to be? As long as we tumble through the day, tomorrow Allah Kareem. That's the style. So the Islamic centers are unfortunately not structured to the way that they would respond to particularly the need of the younger adolescent, late teen and early 20, but that have born here and they have a different need and understanding from Islam than what happens to their fathers or grandfathers and so on. It's number one.
Well, to ask a controversial question, would you blame the scholars of the communities? Would you say that it's primarily their fault, or are there other factors?
Yes and no. Yes, because if you are ill qualified to lead, you shouldn't accept the responsibility. Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullah salamu alayhi in one of the sermons says, I never ordered you to do anything unless I was the first one doing it, and I wouldn't order you not to do anything unless I was the first one who stayed away. So if you are not, if the scholars are not qualified, but asking this is too much. Why? Because you need to have full taqwa to understand that one day you will be asked by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you were not qualified, why did you accept it? But unfortunately, to be frank, that taqwa doesn't exist. So people simply look at it as a job, and as long as it pays, that's it. Whether it's controversial, whether it provides, whether it helps the strategy or not, it doesn't matter. But also the fault lies within what we call the managerial structures within the Islamic sectors. Because primarily they are old and ancient sometimes in their mindset, they bring individuals and they appoint individuals that simply responds and addresses the issue the way they used to be dealt with their parents and so on back home. Literally, what they want, I was told, we don't want scholars that have PhDs or anything else. We don't want any scholar that has university degrees or is able to talk to university students or students and so on. We want a scholar walk home to the center, pray, go back home, and occasionally do some zawaj and talaq wassalam.
In Farsi, you would say rose of Shah. Yeah, that's what they say.
This kind of mindset. Yeah. The idea that we are living in a different world, that there are different challenges, and the result of this, Maulana, has been disastrous, particularly for the youth. The adolescents within the Muslim community are drifting out of Islam like anything. Why? Because the environment is not there to support them early on and provide them with the necessary experience that they tap into it when they become adolescent. And they reach the age of 15, 16, 17, and they have nothing. The first class on Western philosophy, Nietzsche says God is dead. God is dead. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
So the first issue, the first problem that we face was the institutional problems that we have. Number 2 and number 3, what would you say the second biggest and third biggest problem are?
The relationship and the dynamic that exist. The scholars are mashayikhs are I wouldn't call them scholars. The mashayikhs are ill-qualified, and the board members are ill-qualified as well. You have the president of a board that only has 1 hour a week to come to the office and deal with the crisis of the center. The rest of the time, he spends it on his business, whether he's a lawyer, whether he's a doctor, whether he's a pharmacist, or something else. If you don't have the time to spend and deal with the affair of the center, don't accept it. But it's image. And everything that they do is fatwa. That's it. The crisis that we have to deal with. So on the one hand, we have these, and on the other one, the marriage of inconvenience. And the result is disaster.
How would you say we can improve? Because, I mean, without a doubt, we have a lack of qualified scholars. And, everywhere I went, I actually didn't realize this until I came back from the Hawza, is that when I would go to many of the masajids, they don't even have a resident alim. It's run by random people. They do, basic programs. So we definitely have a huge need for scholars. How do we encourage this? Because this is an issue that people are not going. Sometimes people go, but they don't come back. So what can we do to encourage us to get more people, qualified people, to go and then to come back?
I respectfully, Maulana, disagree for people to go.
Okay.
I think we should be able to start some kind of institution that would train our future imams or scholars in this country. And their background should rest both on what we call secular education as well as religious education. Just going back to Hawza and being sucked into a mindset that is primarily theological issues, without having anybody who has asked me, I want to send my son to the Hawza, what should I do? I said, first, let him finish at least basic undergraduate degree before you send him somewhere else. That's number one. So we need funds. We need like-minded individuals within this country to come together and develop a plan. Where do we want to be? The strategic plan. Where do we want to be in 5 or 10 years from now, and how can we do it? And where do we get the fund? You just go around Michigan. Every other day, every other weekend, every couple of weeks, announcement, another $2 million center.
Yeah.
What does that do to the crisis that the youth, the adolescents, and everybody else is dealing with? I work with Access, which is a social organization in Dearborn, deals with a number of community crisis social issues. Our drug use is equal, if not more, to the Caucasians. Our divorce rate is, if it's not worse, is the same. Would you believe ethical and moral corruption within our children sometimes is worse than the community, the white community? Why? You keep building these white elephants around. Yes, it becomes a center where your sons or your uncle's sons or somebody else can take over, and becomes a kind of a grocery shop business orientated for one individual or the other. But where is this to do with the crisis that we do? We don't think about that.
So we should grade our masajids based on Are they actually resolving the issues in the communities?
Yes.
Yeah. You have problems.
What is the
Maybe.
purpose of masajid?
Yeah.
Masjid, we go back to the early history of Islam. Masjid was the center of all social activities. You wanted education, you went to the mosque. Ahlul Bayt taught in the mosque, other scholars taught in the mosque. You wanted a financial assistant, you went to the mosque. You wanted marriage, you went to the mosque. You wanted a resolution of social issue, you went to the mosque. In most cases, 90% of the time, these white elephants are empty. I believe the only way we can do to at least make a dent in the crisis is for like-minded individuals to come together and organize some kind of a seminar, a serious seminar, and say, okay, what are these crises? Just now, about a few weeks ago, was the election. I have never seen anywhere in any country such a shamble within the Muslim community.
Mm.
From the beginning of the year, January, that everybody decided we want boycott Biden and everything else, suddenly close to it, female or feminism for this, feminism, Muslim feminism for that, Muslim feminism for democratic parties, Muslim feminism for others. So the fundamental crisis that we have is really having a clear goal, objectives, and a strategy to be able to achieve. Then the start fund is a critical issue as well.
As far as funding goes, I mean, one of the things I've noticed with the brothers that I studied with personally is that when they came back, many of them, they wanted to work in the religious field. So they were either resident alim or whatnot. And the vast majority, they haven't been able to, meaning that they tried to fill that position. And I would say 80%, maybe they realized that it's just not feasible. And so the vast majority, they do Islamic work on the side, but they're working 9 to 5s in IT and project management and these things. So that's unfortunately a very serious issue as well.
Yeah, funding is an issue because the fund is in the hand of somebody else. Mm-hmm. There is an expression that says whoever pays the piper calls the tune.
Yeah.
So if you want to receive the fund, you have to dance in a particular manner. And if you want to step out of the ring and try to do something different, naturally the fund is not going. This is why I say like-minded individuals need to get together. And, well, now you have heard the hadith as well as I have, that says one of the signs of Akhir al-Zaman is the sun, metaphorical use of language. The sun is rising from the west towards the east, which means what? The corruptions, at least in my all humble interpretation, the corruptions in the east, we reach a point that true Islam is coming from the west back to the east. Are we doing enough for presenting true Islam? I don't think so. What is the mission of being here? The mission is to correct the society when there is corruption and everything else. The mission is not to just work day and night for the sake of American dreams. A story I have, I mentioned it in a couple of lectures in the past. In one of the Canadian cities in the 1980s, I believe, a huge Islamic center was opened. They invited two figures as public speakers. One was the governor of the local area, and the other one was an Islamic scholar from east of Canada. The governor, naturally coming out of the material Western orientated, began with the praise of the Muslim community. Look, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when you moved into this area, you only had one pharmacist, 2 doctors, 1 dentist, and 1 lawyer. Now, within 10, 15 years, look at it, thriving community, etc., etc. When the time came for this professor to deliver his keynote speech, he had a scathing attack against the Muslim community. He said, you are not here. Yes, you can work in the economics field, whatever, in making sure that your life is comfortable. But as a Muslim, there is an ultimate goal and responsibility for you and a mission. That mission is to correct the society when the society gets corrupted. If you get corrupted as well, where is that mission? There is a poem in Farsi, harchi begandad namakash mizanan. Why the ruzi ki begandad namak? Now we have reached that stage. When we came here, whether we accepted it or not, every one of us has a mission to act, to become kunu zaynan lana. By you walking, talking, behaving, you become the image of what we support. وَلَا تَكُونُوا شَيْنًا. What we are doing is the other way around. So if we are supposed to walk, talk, behave, and conduct ourselves as if we are representing this ideal ethical and moral principle within the society, there is something missing within us that we haven't paid attention to. And that is where we need to focus. Our youth are no longer, they care less about morality. The last couple of nights, Mulana, you have organized Fatimiyya 1. I was in Canada in 1996. There was a conference organized by Hawza community in Ottawa, I believe, on Fatima al-Zahra. A young lady stood up and criticized one of the speakers. She said, this Fatima that you have been talking about belongs to 1,400 years ago. What does she have to offer to us now, living in Montreal with the crises and challenges that we have to deal with? It's a pertinent question. Do we, even when it comes to understanding history? I remember one thing that gave me inspiration during the early childhood, and particularly at Hawza when I became depressed, particularly after the imprisonment and so on, was the life of Sayyida Zainab Salamun alayha. And I began to read in depth about her life. And as soon I confronted myself with two Zainab being presented within the society. The Zainab that removes her hijab and hairs and everything else, crying and beating her chest. And another Zainab, تقبل منا هذا القرآن. There's a world of difference between the two. We kept pushing this down the throat of our youth. Ultimately, they feel sick of it once it's constantly repeated.
Without doubt, there's a lot of work to be done. And I think
without shadow of a doubt.
Yeah, I think you mentioned a beautiful point that if Islam can be established here, from here, I think it would go everywhere else as well. We're in the epicenter. When you look at media, when you look at news, when you look at power, that Islam, if it is established quickly here, that will go everywhere in the world. But I think the reverse is also true, that if we don't, if we fail. I remember I saw a documentary. It was called, I think, Islam in America. It was from Ahl al-Bayt TV on Dearborn. And it showed a few individuals that they were third or fourth generation Muslims. And what I noticed about it is that when they said Islam, they didn't even know how to say Islam. They would say, just like how a Caucasian person, a white person would say, they would say Islam. Yeah. And so that, when I was looking at that, I said, if we are not going to do what we're supposed to be doing, that is our future as well. But there's also the flip side as well. So
yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. We go back to Khutbah Fadakiyya. Sayyidah Fatima Salamun alayha reminded the people that what you do now forms the future of your generation. If you don't structure yourself properly, what you have conceived will deliver nothing but blood and poison. Here, within one generation, 2 generations, and we are beginning to see the drift. If we don't do anything about it, soon everything will come.
Any final points?
One of the challenges that I have seen in my life is that we start calculating the possibility of success and failure before we do anything. If the success is not guaranteed, leave it. That's not what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You do your part. Don't think about the success and failure. Leave the rest in the hand of Allah. All our Imams, they did the same thing. Their life is an inspiration for us because at every juncture, at every crisis, at every problem, they did the best that they were capable of. Whether they, at that particular time, they were sure that it's suddenly going to flip the Bani Umayyah around or Bani Abbas, no. But they were obligated to do whatever they wanted to do. We shouldn't give up hope. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would provide us with the support that we need. And this is the role of the ghaib and miracle that Allah would help us if إِنَّ الَّذِينَ قَالُوا رَبُّنَا اللَّهُ ثُمَّ اسْتَقَامُوا. That istiqamah, perseverance, resistance, and determination and sumud is something that we really need, and not to give up. And ultimately, inshallah, even Maulana, if you hold the flag and move it just 1 foot and find somebody else, I did my part, now you take it 1 foot further. It's better than sitting down and saying, it's a challenge, it's a mission impossible and I'm not going to do anything about it. Then you would be asked, I would be asked, you had the language, you lived in a society that all the means were around, and you knew your responsibility, why didn't you do anything? I thought that it's not going to work. That is not the excuse.
Even Imam Hussein alayhi salam in Karbala, he's standing in front of 30,000, he continues forward. Yeah, he doesn't stop. Inshallah, may Allah give us the tawfiq.
Inshallah, and if I mean, in any shape or form, I sincerely believe that we cannot expect the solution to our problem to come from outside. We need to think about it and develop a strategy and ultimately, even little bit, a movement towards this. It is considered to be a success. And we all have to work together.
Inshallah. Shaykh, thank you so much.
Thank you very much
For this wonderful
session. The answers to some of them
No.
were long-winded because it's just the experience, unfortunately.
No. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It was a wonderful session.
Thank you very much. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi.